Hello and welcome to episode 128 of MMO Weekly, presented as always by Chitty's Cheesesteaks. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, joined by our guys, MAK and Matt Mancuso. Guys, last time we spoke, some good things were happening. Mets made some moves. They traded for Freddy Peralta live on the show. That was great. Matthias, I know you weren't there for that one, but that was cool to kind of to be there when that happened. But we're a little less than a week away for pitchers and catchers. Full squad reports. First day is February 16th. So baseball's right around the corner. You got the Super Bowl Sunday. So we're here. Baseball's right around the corner. Very excited. I think Mets fans are a lot more excited going into this than they were maybe say 2 months ago with what the Mets have done. And we're going to kind of talk about the Mets offseason as a whole here now that we're, like I said, we're getting started. But just excited that baseball's finally here, and hopefully the Patriots lose another Super Bowl, which doesn't happen often. Matthias, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. It's funny you talk about the Peralta thing. I was actually finishing up recording on another show that night, and it was like the tail end of the episode, and I got the notifications popping up that Peralta had been traded to the Mets. So yeah, I mean, if you ask Mets fans, probably about, I don't even know, 5-6 days before that, when the whole Kyle Tucker thing was going down, they probably were like, "Oh boy, like." What's the season even going to be?" But I think it's fair to say that most Mets fans, at least, are pretty excited, myself included. I'm really looking forward to baseball season, and it looks like it's an exciting group coming up for the Mets. And yeah, I mean, honestly, I just can't wait for opening day.
Yeah, I mean, in my eyes, the Super Bowl is really the beginning of baseball season. You've already seen the videos from SNY of Jonah Tong, of Nolan McLean throwing, and there's a great article in Fangraphs how that represents the true start of baseball. It's not opening day. It's when you see the grainy video of pitchers going to Port St. Lucie and throwing for the first time. That personally really excites me. I think we're primed for another really good year of baseball. Obviously, that last time I was on the show, the Mets acquired David Peralta, and the Mets acquired Freddy Peralta, and it was cool to have that reaction live. And so, who knows what they're going to do this show? I think overall, with Peralta on the team, the Mets are a lot stronger of a team. In 2026, they've had a really well-rounded offseason, which I look forward to recapping with you guys. And overall, I'm really excited for the year.
Yeah, no, it's good. And Matt, like you said, that other Peralta, David, I think he just retired. So shout out
You
David
did,
Peralta, who
yes.
had nothing to do with the Mets, but hey, whatever, good for you. Freddy Peralta, like you said though, got traded for the last time we spoke on the show. Mets finally got their frontline guy that they talked about for a long time. I feel like he's been linked to the Mets for a while. It's an offseason that I think, you talk about going from lows to losing out on Edwin Diaz somehow, Pete Alonso departing. The whole thing started with trading Brandon Nimmo, right? I feel like that feels like ages ago now that they traded him for Marcus Semien. But, it felt like you didn't know really what was going on, as far as what the plan was, what the Mets were doing. You mentioned they lose out on Tucker, but they make a great pivot with Bo Bichette. They get their guy to, hit behind Mon Soto. I think it was a great signing. I think Bichette, they did the top 10 third baseman right now the other day on MLB Network. And I believe Bichette came in 6th or 7th already on their list. So, already starts the year as a top 10 third baseman, new position for him. But it seems like there's exciting things on the way. Obviously forgot about the Mets signing Devin Williams. I mean, I guess that goes getting hand in hand, losing out on Diaz, so to speak. But a lot of new faces. That was the goal here. I think that was the theme of the offseason more than anything, was to, David Stearns to build this team more in his image, his likeness, revamp the clubhouse. And, hopefully with, one of the highest payrolls in the sport, not missing out on an expanded playoffs. That's the hopes here. So, I think that they've done enough to do that. It's always funny, right? The Mets, I think, are estimated to finish at about 89 wins. Never projected to win the NL East. I feel like they've maybe like twice my whole life they've been projected to win the NL East, and they never really do. So I guess it makes sense. But the 89 wins should certainly get you in the postseason. Talk about whether it's the division or a wild card spot, and that's what you're hoping here for the Mets. These young guys taking bigger steps. Nolan McLean, Francisco Alvarez. What are you going to get out of him this year? Carson Benjers of the world. Probably going to make his debut at some point sooner than later, and man in left field for them. So, like I said, a lot of new faces, but still, the same high expectations now that they've had since Steve Cohen walked in the door.
Yeah. Yeah. What I mean, really, I look at this roster and I mean, you could say, yeah, I think earlier this offseason it was fair to question what exactly was going on because like you said, it started with trading Brandon Nimmo for Marcus Semien, which confused people, but I sort of understood it. Nimmo is owed over $100 million over the next 5 years, and he's about to turn 33. Like he's not exactly in his prime anymore, and he's definitely going to have to be more of a DH going forward. And I know Marcus Semien is owed $24 million a year, but he just won another Gold Glove. He actually played pretty well once he started working on his approach a little bit. Losing Edwin Diaz is a tough blow, and honestly, I think that's still the biggest loss of the offseason. The one area that still sort of scares me a little bit about the roster is the bullpen, but Devin Williams started looking a little more like Devin Williams later in the year. Luke Weaver, again, a guy, he had to pitch through some injuries. I think he could bounce back pretty well. Luis Garcia was a smaller signing, but I think Luis Garcia, sneaky, solid pickup. I mean, losing out on Alonso was also tough from an offensive standpoint, but he also was not a very strong defensive first baseman and is probably another guy headed towards being a DH. And you also have to contend with the fact that Juan Soto is probably also a DH at some point in his contract. So they sort of had to clear out the roster. And same goes for Jeff McNeil, who had a rough year, is coming off, wrist surgery. They sort of had to clear the clutter a little bit. And unfortunately, it meant losing some fan favorites, some guys who were among the faces of the franchise. But I think overall, at the end of the day, that's why the offseason doesn't end in December. The season doesn't start in January. And it's fair to say that this is a more well-rounded roster than it was entering 2025.
Yeah, I can completely agree with you. Entering 2025, the Mets had a 60% chance of making the postseason. Right now, the current team sits at 80%. They had a 23% chance at winning the division. Right now, it's 33. So I think that shows not only the moves that were made, but really the impact of the moves. It was something that I think Stearns and company has done really well this year is increasing both the floor and the ceiling of the team. So if you look at their projected WAR total per position, they're very well rounded. There aren't really any laggards kind of dragging them down in one position. Every player, and I'd argue it's probably the error bars are probably a little more skewed to the right, indicating a little bit more upside. So every position is projected for at least 1.5 WAR, and that's after signing Bichette. And so I think that's really neat. So not only are you improving the floor of the team, with which the Mets have a lot of depth options. So position player wise, I'll actually open the floor to you guys. Jared Young was 50% better, or 47% better than the average hitter in AAA last year. Of course, it's AAA, and this is not an apple to oranges comparison. But two Mets in the last 10 years were 50% better than the league average hitter. So I'd open the floor to you guys, and I want to ask, who do you think these players are?
In the majors?
In the major leagues, yes. Of course, AAA and a major league comparison is not the same, but just to indicate the level of performance that Jared Young had last year.
Juan Soto is definitely one of them.
Juan Soto is one, yes.
Is the other one? Man, trying to think of offensive players. Is it Alonso?
It's not Alonso. Sal, what's your guess?
Is it Lindor? I don't know.
It's not Lindor. It's Brandon Nimmo.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay.
Brandon Nimmo when he initially broke out. And so I think that really kind of speaks that the Mets can have a minor league player that's 50% better than the league average hitter appear and be on the team in the coming year. I think that really kind of speaks to their depth. So not only do they have a lot of really good depth options, Matthias, you mentioned the bullpen earlier. The Mets just don't have a good, solid eighth inning guy. They have a lot of intriguing minor league names. And one that I particularly want to highlight is Nate Lavender, who was a pitcher that was selected by the Rays in the Rule 5 draft. and underwent Tommy John surgery. He was returned to the Mets. He does not throw very hard, but as we all know, velocity is not the name of the game anymore. It really the characteristics of your fastball and of your stuff is really what matters. And Lavender, despite having pretty middling velocity in the low to mid 90s, was able to accumulate great strikeouts numbers when he was in the minors. So the question is why? The Mets have an amazing pitching development program right now. So how are they going to really maximize Lavender and some of the other guys that are in camp? Because I particularly find that interesting. How are players coming to the Mets and not only succeeding in the Mets uniform, but how are they getting better? We saw a lot of opportunities with this last year. Clay Holmes, Sean Nye the year before, and that's only to name a few. So the depth is one really strong, and I think a reason why their playoff probability sits so high right now. But also, we opened the show by talking about Freddy Peralta. And I think what you need to have is you need to have some players that are superstars, some players um, that will really catapult you to a playoff series, and Peralta and Lindor and Soto all sit kind of on this realm. And it's really good if your third best comparison, again according to Fangraphs, is Barry Bonds. And with Lindor, if you look at where he is with age, and if you look at where he is with production, the second comp is Charlie Gehringer, the Tigers' second baseman. Um, so I think that really just kind of speaks to not only the superstar potential that the Mets have on their roster right now, but really the expansive depth that they've built throughout their minor league system.
Yeah, and really just looking at the lineup projection too. Earlier this offseason, I think we were talking about this after Alonso left. Like, it did not look like a deep lineup beyond Juan Soto, really. But now you could say, all right, now you go Lindor, Soto, Bichette, Polanco, and then after that you can mix and match. All of a sudden, you can put who knows, maybe Beatty's there, maybe Francisco Alvarez is there some days. You go down, and Luis Robert, who I know has struggled the last couple of years staying on the field in particular, but this is a guy who hit 38 home runs in 2023. I'm not saying he's going to hit 38 home runs this coming season, but when I saw the Mets traded for him, the first thing I thought of was, oh, maybe this is a guy who could really benefit from a change of scenery. We saw this with a couple of White Sox the last year or so. Michael Kopech, when he got traded to the Dodgers, broke out as a reliever. He was unhittable down the stretch and into the postseason. Andrew Vaughn, this past year with the Brewers, went on a heater after getting traded from the White Sox. I think Robert, I'm not saying he's going to return to being an absolute superstar, but I could see him improving a lot. There's still a lot of things to like about him, and he's going to be hitting in the lower third of the lineup. So it started with adding Polanco, and it continued with adding Bichette, but the lineup looks deeper, honestly, compared to last year. And like I said earlier, it's about being more well-rounded. There's more speed on the team now. And even with Polanco and Bichette playing new positions, I'd say the defense is much better. Pete Alonso was a very below-average defensive first baseman. Jeff McNeil was starting to lose range. Brandon Nimmo was also starting to lose some range and his foot speed. So I think overall, David Stearns had a plan. I know that fans questioned it a lot with losing some of these key players, but I think he did a really strong job of turning the offseason around. And there's reasons for the fan base to be optimistic going into the year.
Yeah, I agree with that. The Mets defense up the middle, I think, is probably the best in the majors right now. I don't think you're going to beat Lindor, Semien, or Robert. And the interesting thing about Robert, Baseball Savant just released an article highlighting this. But obviously, there are three aspects that you need to try to excel at if you're an offensive. If you are an offensive player, you need to obviously do well hitting. You need to do well in defense, and then you need to take the extra base. Your base running needs to be as pristine as possible. And he came out and he said, "Hey, obviously the actual stats weren't there for Robert over the last few years, but if you look at the traits, his bat speed is still excellent. His outs above average, which is a way to measure defense, is still exceptional. and his sprint speed is still really good. So, you talked about McNeil and Nimmo losing some foot speed. With Robert, that isn't the case, and so I'm really excited to see what he brings, not only offensively but defensively in the coming year.
Yeah, I mean, in that respect, you feel better not running Tyrone Taylor out there every day, right? At the very least, you think he's a better version of Tyrone Taylor as far as the ceiling, and really the floor, right? Because they're the same level defender, in my opinion. Um, Matthias, you talked about another former White Sox, Michael Kopech. I like that name. I believe he's still a free agent and can pitch in the Mets bullpen, and they should sign him. Because that is my one main concern with all this. I feel like I've said this all off season now, losing Diaz. I'm worried about the pitching, especially the bullpen. With the addition to Peralta, and also we haven't talked about Tobias Myers really getting also coming in that trade. I think from the pen and the rotation standpoint, he's a flexible arm that I think is going to end up paying probably big dividends for them this year. But from that respect, the bullpen is what scares me. You lost the best closer in baseball. You can never have enough arms. So if Michael Kopech wants to come here, great. Come on. He's got lights out fastball, good slider. Like you said, Matthias, he really figured it out in the bullpen last year. So if the Mets can do that or willing to do that, the more arms, the better, because that's just my worry overall. Because obviously you saw what happened last year with them not having enough starting pitching and not having a ton of depth in the pen, and it hurting them. So
I
we'll see.
mean, I like that they'll probably use Myers out of the bullpen. He had a 1.91 ERA as a reliever last year. That's strong, and he was pretty good as a starter in 2024. And we saw this. The Mets saw it with their own eyes late in the season in 2024. He shut them down the last weekend of the regular season, and in Game 3 of that wild card series before Pete Alonso hit that home run, Tobias Myers again shut them down for 5 innings. So we've seen how good he can be. He was quite the success story. I mean, he was traded by Tampa Bay for Junior Caminero, and then he just bounced around from team to team on the waiver wire. The Brewers gave him a minor league deal. He broke out in the majors, and I think he's proven he's a solid major league arm. I agree with you though. You can never have enough arms. That's why I appreciate, some of those smaller depth signings like Luis Garcia, another guy who was a late bloomer, still throws pretty hard in his late 30s. But I think something that will help greatly is that they're getting AJ Minter back this year. Minter was great when he was healthy, but I mean, missing him for most of the year, I think it hurt the bullpen way more than people realized. It forced them to trade for Gregory Soto, who I know had a good first couple weeks with the team and then really fell off late in the year. And at that point, it was basically just Brooks Raley as the trustworthy lefty in the bullpen. So I think when you pair Raley with Minter, I mean, those are two solid left-handed pitchers, and one guy who throws pretty hard and one guy who doesn't really. And it's a nice combination. So I think Minter coming back is definitely a huge boost to the bullpen. But I do agree with you. I would appreciate maybe one more arm. It doesn't have to be something flashy, but maybe a guy like Kopech who's coming off an injury and would sign a smaller deal. It couldn't hurt.
Yeah, I also really like that Myers move. When Baseball Perspective released their pitch measuring metrics, I believe at the beginning of last year, one guy they highlighted, he said, "Hey, Tobias Myers, he doesn't throw hard. He doesn't seem like he'd be a great major league pitcher. But what we found using those stats is his pitches tunnel really well. So what does that mean? That means if he were to throw a fastball, if he were to throw a changeup, they move in the same path before diverting very late. So right before it gets to the batter, inducing a lot of swing and miss, inducing a lot of confusion for the batter, and that's always really what you want to see. I've done a little bit of research. I have found that Peralta exhibits similar traits with his fastball and changeup. So that's also something pretty interesting. I think the Mets have really identified guys like Myers, and guys like Peralta who have these interesting traits. They have a lot of non-roster invitees. And they've really just kind of thrown darts out to try to land some. We haven't even talked about Craig Kimbrell yet, who might be trying to finish his Hall of Fame career with Mets. Who knows? So overall, I think there's a lot of different looks, a lot of different shapes. The Mets also have a lot of young guys, especially relievers coming up their minor league system. I've mentioned Nate Lavender, sorry. Who I also find interesting is keep an eye out for Ryan Lambert and Dylan Hall, two flamethrowers who are coming through the Met system. They're knocking on the door of the majors. They're right on the cusp. I think they're going to be really good. I saw Lambert when he was in Somerset last year. He looked lights out, and I expect both of them to bring their heat to Queens pretty soon.
I mean, Dylan Ross did get added to the roster the last weekend of the season, so it's clear he's on their radar. And I'm fully expecting him to be in the bigs this year. And Ryan Lambert, considering the way he lit up the minors this past year, I mean, he looks like a guy who is probably the closer of the future, or he could be a future closer. And I feel like with the way relievers get to the majors so quickly, I think it's more than reasonable to expect him to be in the bigs later this year.
Yeah, and those are names like I'm not even familiar with. It's interesting, just how different this team is going to look out of spring training, and who knows by the summertime. But there's two mainstays still though. It's Lindor and Soto, right? One's the second best shortstop in the league according to the Shredder. One's the second best right fielder in the league according to the Shredder. So that's good. It's good to have top two players in two positions. They're both still really good. And I expect Soto to take another step this year. Now that you've got someone to hit behind him in Bichette, right? A real protection. I think a year under his belt now. Obviously, we saw what he did in the second half last year. He finished, top 3 in the MVP voting when it was all said and done. I think he's going to have a monster year. I'm excited for that. To see him take another step if there even is one, but a player of his caliber, I think there certainly is. And for Lindor, the same deal, looking to be really my issue with Lindor is just he's a very peak and valley offensively. There's times where he can carry you, and then there's months where he's just ice cold. That's something I'd love to see level out a bit more, but that's just the kind of player he is. And if you have a lineup around you that's not strikeout heavy, that puts the ball in play more, that moves runners over, that sort of thing. We know Bichette is, was the best hitter in baseball, runs the scoring position last year. Hopefully that levels that all out. But this is a team now that, especially, at least in the NL East, can contend, it seems like with any of these teams. That being said, it all goes through LA. Had a conversation with a coworker about this yesterday. It's games have to be played, understand all that, but everything goes through the Dodgers. It doesn't matter. So everything you're essentially doing, you're trying to beat LA. And, do I think they're there yet? No, I think they're a good team. And, you got to play 162 games, right? This team could look a hell of a lot different in August, to seeing what happens, who's available, deadline, whatnot. So we'll see, but, very excited overall that spring training started. Is there anyone that you're like under the radar looking to have a big spring training that you think fans should look out for? If there's someone that's, maybe in the minor leagues that you think could break out. We talked about those roster invitees. I'm curious what you guys think, because there's always one or two guys in camp every year.
So I'm going to go with a guy who made his major league debut last year. It was not very memorable, but my pick is going to be Jonathan Pintaro. He's developed into like a legit major league option as probably like the Mets 7th starter. I saw him when he was in Somerset. He was dominating the Patriots, and he was it's a little bit of like an old timey-ish delivery. There's a lot of like east to west action on his pitches, and he was really he's not like Lambert where he'll throw fastballs by you, but the quality of his stuff has one really just impressed me, impressed others in the audience, and then also impressed the Mets. He was called up to make his major league debut last year. It didn't go so well, but I expect him to play like a pivotal role. You mentioned the Mets had injury concerns with their rotation and with their bullpen last year, and that's something that really contributed to them falling out of the playoff picture. I think this guy's a legit major league pitcher. I think he can come in and give you a couple starts. Let's say something happens to Myers. Let's say he's hurt. He can fill that role pretty admirably. And I'm really excited to see what he can bring in 2026.
Yeah, it's crazy because I worked in the Pioneer League for 2 years, and Pintaro was pitching for the Glacier Range Riders while I was working for that league. And, it was pretty awesome seeing him first get picked up by the Mets and then make his major league debut. And I think, it's sort of unfair to judge him based off just that one appearance, because I do think he has a ton of potential. I'm going to go with a guy who, it's crazy to say he's flown under the radar, but with how much fanfare some of their prospects are getting, I feel like Ryan Clifford has sort of flown under the radar. He had a great year last year, a very good bounce back season after kind of a rough or sort of disappointing 2024. I think there's a very real chance if either Jorge Polanco struggles or not struggles, if Jorge Polanco gets hurt, or maybe, yeah, he is struggling at first base, or if one of the guys like Vientos or Beatty, or if Carson Bench doesn't exactly light the world on fire, there's a chance you see Ryan Clifford in the majors this year. I mean, I think he needs a little more time in AAA to sort of acclimate there, but his plate discipline improved a lot. He struck out less. He still hits for a ton of power. I think he can play first base. He can maybe play corner outfield a bit. I think if he has a great spring and then gets off to a hot start in the minors, there's a very real chance we see him in the majors this year.
Yeah, I really like that answer with Clifford. There's this modeling system online called the Oyster, which has become everyday reading. It's excellent and does it really well in not only explaining the math behind its projection, but translating it to English. And so their model is really high on Clifford and at risk of plagiarism. I'm going to kind of read out the reasons why from their article earlier today. So the things that they really like about Clifford is he hits the ball hard, he hits the ball high. He doesn't strike out at a really bad rate, and he gets on base. And he's doing this against far older competition, which is really a way to measure minor league guys. So, like, if you are a AAA player and you're 27 and you have really good stats against AAA pitchers, there are kind of some conflicting variables there. There's, hey, you might be older and you're expected to do better, or hey, maybe the environment is a bit of a different hitting environment than it will be in the major leagues. But with Clifford, he's really answered these questions in the minor leagues. He's only 21, and he kept his. I'll quote this word for word. He kept his strikeouts within half a standard deviation of the league average. So it's hardly in like red flag territory. It's a little bit of a yellow warning sign, but I'm really excited to bring his power to Queens. The Mets have a very exciting prospect system. And he's just the latest of guys to really come to the Mets system and improve. And I think he'll do really well in 2026.
Interesting. Yeah. Feel like I forgot about Ryan Clifford as well. Really, he was that young that he was only 21. So yeah, hopefully all these young guys will be making impacts at some point this year for them. And kind of last thing I have, just talking about young guys, is this a make or break year for Francisco Alvarez? Not only to stay healthy, to be on the field and catch 150 plus games, but be a consistent offensive player that, he at one point was the number one prospect in baseball. I'm kind of curious what you guys think there, because I feel like the leash at some point is going to get short for him too.
Yeah, I feel like the tough thing is that the guy behind him probably in the system is, I would say, Chris Suero. But there's some questions on it, whether or not Suero will actually be a catcher going forward. But I think Alvarez, it's tough to gauge here because he had a 921 OPS after he came back from AAA this past year. He looked like a completely different player at the plate. His defense, I know, isn't spectacular, but he's 24 now. I think he's proven he can hit a bit. But I do want to see him play full season. And a full season, I'm not saying he needs to be a 900 OPS guy, but, somewhere in the 800 to 850 range would be quite nice. So I don't know if I would call it a make or break year, but you definitely want to see him stay healthy, and you do want to see a little more consistency. It's just that right now I don't see the Mets having someone who could be a strong replacement for him either this year or next year.
I think Alvarez is going to be a special player in 2026. I promise I'm not coming in with unbridled optimism on all these guys. I just think the Mets are really good at maximizing their potential. Just a quick note on Clifford, he's actually 22, but I guess my point still stands. So with Alvy, the things that he've tried over the last few seasons haven't worked out. He tried the JD Martinez special. Hey, is my profile best suited to spray the ball all over the field? And then, Eric Chavez seemingly has encouraged that manner of behavior, that manner of hitting. Eric Chavez is no longer with the team. So I'm really excited what Alvarez is going to bring to the table in 2026. What I believe the Alvarez niche is really the Isaac Paredes special, where he just shoots the ball down the left field line. And I think we saw that in the second half. If you again look at Baseball Savant's new batting metrics, it really showed he pulled the ball a lot more. And the angle of his bat was different both in the vertical and horizontal axis. So he's really looking to pull it, and that's where he did a lot of his damage. There's a reason he was ranked the #1 prospect in baseball when he came into the majors, and so I think he's still young enough to fulfill that potential. I think he's still young enough to make adjustments to his swing, as we saw in the second half, and I really expect those adjustments to continue in 2026.
Yeah, hope so. You want to more than anything feel like he has been healthy too, which is a big part of it. So if he can stay healthy, stay in the field, hopefully, he can kind of turn into that #1 prospect or former #1 prospect, like you were saying. But great stuff, guys. I think we're gonna wrap it up here. Really good stuff. We'll check in after pitchers and catchers report. We get our grainy video of everybody working out, doing their warm ups, playing catch, all that good stuff. Can't wait for it. But we're here. We've made it through. And as always, everybody, let's go Mets.